Okay, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up a basic spreadsheet in Excel with that spreadsheet containing a set of variables with values associated with them. So basically, really quickly, when you're looking at the general structure of the spreadsheet, you'll notice that at the top you have column headers. So you've got A, B, C, D. And so these letters are essentially reflecting columns. And then on the side over here, you've got these numbers here reflecting rows. So you've got row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. So each cell reflects the intersection between a column and a row. So A1 is reflecting, this cell is essentially reflecting row 1 and column 1. And then so B5 right here, this is reflecting column B, row 5. This cell right here would be column C, row 8. So you can even see the numbers that appear over here whenever you're clicking a given cell. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our variables for our data set. And we're essentially going to pivot off of this presentation right here. This is a Word document with a column for individual case identifiers. And then we have a variable gender identification with values of 0 and 1 for reflecting identification as male or female. Ed level is reflecting essentially educational level, efficacy, interests, courses, and height. So we're going to set up all of these columns in the Excel program, and then we're going to enter the values on each of those variables below. So we're going to start off by going to cell A1, and I'm just going to go ahead and type in ID. So this is going to be the case identifier. Then we're going to type in gender ID, then ed level, efficacy, interest, courses, and height. So these are all variables in our data set. And by the way, I can widen the spacing a little bit if I want to, or I could shrink it a little bit if I want to. Obviously, with a longer name, it doesn't really appear. So I can do those sorts of things. So under ID, I'm just going to type in 1 through 10 because I have, this is just the identifier for each case in my data set. So those are the identifiers. And so, ID 1 is essentially person 1, ID 2 is person 2, ID 3 is person 3, all the way through person 10. But those are arbitrary identifiers. I could have given, one identifier, I could have given 14 here and, 25 here. It doesn't really matter. It's just that I'm just kind of using a sequence of numbers for ID in this particular demonstration. So for gender ID, gender is essentially a nominal variable in our data set and with codes, value codes of 0 and 1. So a value of 0 reflects a person who identifies as male. A value of 1 reflects the identification as female. So we're going to type in those values in the program. So I'm going to type in 0 for person 1, 0 for person 2. Those two people identify as male. Then 2 female persons identifying as female, then male, and then female, and then 3 more identifying as male, and then 1 as female. So that's essentially all it is to it. I just typed in the values and used the down arrow key to enter those values in. Then for ed level, we'll type in 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1. And the ed level variable was reflecting essentially a person's definition as being a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, or designation as freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior in college. And so a value of 1 reflects freshman, value of 2, sophomore, and so forth. So this is an ordinal variable within our data set, and so that's essentially how I've used that coding system to designate those levels. Then we have efficacy as a variable. And this is a person's identification as being low in efficacy or high in efficacy. And this is also essentially an ordinal variable. And basically with ordinal variables, what we're working with is a variable where the values on the variable reflect a relative ordering on that characteristic. So it doesn't reflect any kind of absolute amount of a characteristic or anything of that nature, but it does reflect sort of a rank ordering on that characteristic. So a value of 0 would reflect low efficacy, a value of 1 reflects high efficacy. So you can see right here that person 1 says that he or she is low in efficacy, person 2 is high, and so forth. So we'll enter those values from the document as well. So I'll type in 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 0 and a 1. And there you go. Then we have the interest variable. And for this particular variable, this is treated as an interval scale variable with values ranging from 1 being extremely low to value of 9, which is extremely high in interest. And this is basically interest in learning stats. And with this particular variable, when you're dealing with interval scale variables, you're dealing with variables that reflect the kind of amount of a characteristic that is present. So basically a difference between two adjacent values, like between 1 and 2, or between 9 and 10, or 3 and 4, or 6 and 7, that difference of 1 unit reflects an equal difference in the amount of the characteristic, that characteristic being interest in learning stats. It's also important to note that an interval scale variable can have a value of 0 as one of the scale points, but the value of 0 is arbitrary. And so, for instance, let's say that we were using the interest scale, but we had people indicating on this scale how much interest they had, and their interest, they could indicate falling at a -4 to a +4, and 0 happens to fall at the midpoint within that scale. So if a person indicates having a value of 0, that would just signal that they're falling at the midpoint on the scale, but it would not reflect an absence of interest in learning stats. So keep in mind that with an interval scale variable, a value of 0 is an arbitrary scale point. It doesn't reflect the absence of the characteristic. So for our interest variable, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to type those values in. So we had a 2, a 3, a 7, 10, 3, 1, 6, 9, 1, and 4. So there you go. Now, the next variable is a discrete ratio variable. And with ratio scale variables, a value of 0 would signal the absence of a characteristic, and so that you're studying. So with courses, this is the number of previous stats classes a person has taken. And so in this case, the courses are reflecting counts, or the number of courses that have been taken previously. Obviously, you can't have a negative count, so you can either have a 0 or a positive count. So in this particular case, the variable is a ratio variable, and it's discrete in that the values are essentially whole numbers, and reflecting sort of basically a discrete characteristic. The height variable is also ratio. You could theoretically have a height of 0, which would reflect the absence of height. In this particular case, height is being measured in millimeters, and so we're getting down to pretty precise measurements when it comes to height. And so it's really behaving more like a continuous ratio scale variable. So we will now type in this information for each of these variables. So for courses, we had person 1 had 0 previous stat courses, person 2 had 2 courses, person 3 had 3, person 4 had 1, then 0, 1, 2, 2, 3, and 1. And then for height, we also have a number of different heights represented. So here are all our heights that are represented in millimeters.